Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. I'm super excited this time to have another one of my big bad con, I don't know, coordinators. You're more than a coordinator. I don't know what.
Accomplice?
There we go, accomplice. Sophie Lagace. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much. My pronouns are she, her for anyone listening. And I'm delighted. I've known Ezra for many years, possibly since the first Big Bad Con,
I think that is
but
true.
since an early one for sure.
Well, and Endgame and the whole all the Endgame calls
Yes.
and that sort of thing. Uh, so for those of you who don't know, Sophie is she has written for many of your favorite games. She has worked on many of your favorite cons. She runs prolifically before COVID when we could still run games. But and is a driving force behind Big Bad Con, which you have heard me say many times is the best dang con in probably anywhere, but definitely in the Bay Area. So, Sophie, how did you get your start GMing?
um, I started playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the first version, back in the early '80s when I started college, and played with friends. We had a club there. It was all engineering all the time. So we had a good pool of nerds, and I tried there. After a few weeks, I also tried Middle Earth role playing, better known as MERP. Um, Gamma World, 007, Top Secret. So tried a bunch of games, Traveler, and sort of bonded with some players. It wasn't an official regular group within the club, but we more often than not we'd play with each other. We all took turns at trying to be GM. So when I remember that the first time I GM'd was for AD&D, and it I tried to create an adventure where there were other ways besides combat to get out of the big challenges, and that resulted in the players meeting a demon and agreeing to sell one of the group to the demon as a jester. Even though the player of that character was not on board with that, so and I don't know, it's a coincidence, but his name was Donald.
Well, we can only hope. And so, did you sort of become the kind of prototypical forever GM, or was it kind of a continuing rotating?
No, I've always tried to do both GMing and playing. I like both.
Mm.
But as time goes, I GM more and more.
And from those sort of early games, in the '80s, they were often very hit or miss. But did you find yourself navigating towards certain either mechanics or themes, or did one of those did mechanic or theme sort of jump out at you, or
Well, in general, in literature, in movies, and so forth, and in games, I've always been more interested in science fiction than fantasy. Not that I don't like fantasy; I love it to bits. And I came to gaming actually with I just wanted to play two things: The Lord of the Rings, which was this obscure series of books at the time, and the Mabinogion, which is this mythical cycle from Wales. So that was my mindset, and I was super happy to find the place to play this game I'd heard of, D&D. But then I met with 10 by 10 corridor tiles and the stunning news that making a female character meant that she couldn't have top strength no matter what I
right,
rolled, which
right?
I had rolled. So that was a nice start. So that means, and since that club tried a lot of different games, that means I did browse a lot of systems, and money was sometimes an obstacle. I was a student. So if I could borrow the books from one of my friends, we were golden. But some of the excellent things that came in the 80s, like Star Wars from West End Games, I mean, I lost it after those books. They were beautiful on top
Yeah.
of being a good game, at least, you know, compared to what we had at the time. But I just didn't have the pocket money. So that means that there are some of the those evolving systems that I really didn't meet until later. I had an interlude at the end of the 80s when I graduated. All my friends graduated. After a few years, everybody scattered through North America. And so I lost my gaming group. But then I moved to the Bay Area in January 93 to,
Wow.
yeah, I was here for a year or two, so I would get international experience and go back to Canada. But then I thought that the best way to meet people and make new friends was to go check if there was any gaming. Went to Games of Berkeley, answered some billboard ads, and tried some gaming groups. And pretty rapidly, I met a lot of people. I mean, there are people from that original group that I played with last night. You know,
Yeah.
and through that and through them, I met later that year this Californian born and bred that was at the time the best GM I had ever met, and still is one of the best GMs I've ever met. And I married him because, you know, you find a good GM, you gotta keep him.
There you go. There you go. And so, there's sort of like when I'm starting to come towards designing, thinking up a module or something like that, I I tend to have the idea first, and for me, what system I'm going to run is pretty much secondary because the
Mhm.
rules kind of don't matter. What about for you? Are you thinking I want to I want to make something for Traveler, so within Traveler I'm going to make this, or I've got a cool idea. What game do I think will work with this? How do you kind of approach that?
It varies.
Mhm.
If it's like a well-known IP that I want to play in that setting, I'm gonna check if there's a bespoke system for it, and if so, if it supports what I understand to be the feel of that setting. And if it doesn't, I'll go look for one of my go-to games and try those first. Do they work? And if not,
Mm.
I'll search further afield. So an example of that style would be like before we had The Expanse as a role-playing game, but you know I was enamored with the setting. So in that case, when the game came out, I jumped on it, but I already knew that I wasn't super fond of the system, the age system that it's based on. I mean, no offense to anybody who likes it. I can see its qualities. I think the best thing about it is the wild dice, the dice that allow you to get special effects,
Yeah.
and
I mean, we
that's a
all
lot
have
of fun.
systems that we like, don't like for
Right.
various reasons, and it's kind of like movies. It's super personal. One thing
Yes.
somebody likes, you might not like, and that's okay. That's why there are so many systems.
Yes, and I'm so happy with that. So
Yeah.
in that case, that system for me and my type of GMing, which is often like drop my plans and off the cuff go with some idea that the players produce. So it's very improv based. So that's less suitable for somebody like me. So I tried it. We played it for a few months, uh, and then I asked everybody, what would you think if I converted it to Fate? Because I think I can do a really good job with Fate. And everybody was like, yeah, go for it. So we did, and people really enjoyed it. Other times, um, another recent example, and not coincidentally, another evil hat example. Uh, I've been for the last 2.5 years since the pandemic. I've been working on porting over Evil Hat games to Roll20 virtual tabletop, and in the process, I was looking this winter, I think, at Scum and Villainy. I hadn't looked at it for a while. I had played it when it came out, but then I kind of forgot. But when I set up the compendium, tie that to the module that was already posted, and I really got a love for it to GM it for the first time. So I got some friends together and asked, this is the game I want to play. This is not one where I'll switch to another system. What do you think of that? Are you on board? And I found, among my friends, a group that liked that. And in that case, on the player at the player's request, they came up with the idea of tying it to another setting, Fading Suns, because it meshes pretty well. It has a lot of similar concept and similar uh, factions and so forth. So that happened. Again, it was a mash of two things, but it wasn't because I planned it. They did it, not me.
So, what was it about Scum and Villainy that kind of hooked you in?
It was the power that players have that's granted to them, not just because it's that kind of social contract within a group, but by the rules as established, that they can create a lot of the settings on their own, that all the ups and downs of the plot are created by consequences to the player's decisions. So I think it helps to have, when you're GMing, to have some very big picture idea of things that could happen based on the premise you place in front of your players. But that's just a general picture, and as I said, I really thrive on ignoring anything I've prepared or recycling it and going with the player's actions.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are both very similar in that regard, and I think that there are ways that you can do that, that you don't have to you don't have to feel like you're playing without a net. You can have, like, for instance, I a lot of times will have a like a printed property, like
Hmm.
I've got this Warhammer module,
Yeah.
um, and this is the spine of the
Yes.
idea, and then the players are going to put the musculature and the nervous system on there, and so parts of this module we won't use, and we'll do other things because the players are going that direction, and that's awesome. And then when I need to get things back on track, I've got this spine that I can go back to and be like, and now the next step on this. And it's
Exactly.
wonderful. I mean, it's and I think Scum and Villainy is an interesting case in that, because um, it's so freeform, but it does allow for that kind of, like, okay, I've got these four scenes that I know I want to have happen. The rest of the stuff between that, you guys will make that up, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And of course, that off the cuff jamming is something you get better as you practice it. The first time it's nerve wracking, but if you do something good, you think, "Oh, I want to get that again." And the more you do it, the more you succeed at it, and you get some tricks, like using, even if you're not using the system or you're not using exactly the plot of the module, yeah, or it's a module that was meant for another setting, but you think it would fit really well. Um, you you get something like you said that can act as a structure to build on, and you
Yeah, I
tie
mean,
all your
it,
scenes to
there's
it.
there's really no there's I mean there's nothing better than just reading a lot of stuff, and
Yes.
we're so lucky to have super easy access to PDFs of, and super cheap access to
Yeah.
PDFs of systems beyond imagine. And so, take advantage of those bundles that just throw a bunch of games at you and just read a little bit of it and take an idea from here and take an idea from there. And
Yeah.
even if you tell your players you're running D&D, but I'm going to use, instead of inspiration, I'm going to use this idea. I'm going to use fate points from Warhammer or something, like, you can
Yeah.
kind of pull stuff in. And um, uh, you can, the more different stuff you read, the more ideas you have to steal from.
Yeah, and that's something I've noticed for a long time. It's not something new, uh, but it's getting the field of games that are available. It's getting so wide that, of course, it's nigh impossible to know them all. But I know a very wide swath of them. I have a running list at one point. Oh, 10, 12, 15 years ago, somebody had on a forum had challenged people to list all the systems they had played, even if it was only once.
Oh my gosh.
And so, and I did that, and even counting all the editions, like all the various editions of D&D count as one, right? And I have well over 200, 220 games that I've played or GM'd at least once, not counting any playtest or homebrews.
Right.
So, and that's a fraction. There's so many more that I haven't seen, but all during all this period, this long period I've been playing games, I've often noticed, the we uh, we make fun sometimes of the person who has, like, they've written this game in their closet, right? And they've been crafting it for 25 years, and they're so proud of it. And they'll tell you that they've looked at all the other games, and when they say all, they usually mean two.
Right. D&D. I've looked at D&D and, one other
And
fantasy,
Vampire.
and Palladium,
Yes, yeah. So yes, for anybody from player to GM to author, I think it's great to look at a lot of different things, not to copy them necessarily, but to draw inspiration and to also see what's been done. And the more you want to go towards the pro side, the more you should be familiar with some of the solutions to common challenges that have been used.
Yeah.
Also, there's sometimes games that you don't like, you don't enjoy playing or running. It just doesn't work for you, but there's that one idea that's really useful that you'll pillage. I can
It-
name a few like that.
yeah, no, 100%. And cons are great for that as well. When
Yes.
I go to a con, now I mostly play board games, but I try and play one system, one game that I have never played before, just to,
Mhm.
like, see what it is, just to get a feel and try something new, because there are so many, every year there are new ideas coming out. And whether it's oh god, I'm going to mess the name up, Yaziba's Bed and Breakfast or
Yes.
something, all this stuff that just fascinating, cool ideas, especially in the indie world. Stuff that the apocalypse, the Powered by the Apocalypse scene is doing, and that sort of thing. There's just unfathomable numbers of things that are taking really cool ideas and then layering on them and making them even cooler. And it's just fun to see somebody excited about that. And so it sounds like you are kind of a system agnostic gamer. You're more about what system will best tell the story that I want to tell here.
As a GM, there are a few go-tos that I will fall back on very easily. As a player, I will try just about anything. I may not want to repeat the experience with some systems, like, it wasn't my thing. But if it's a group of people I love, we can play bridge. That's fine.
So as a GM, what is it about those systems? Like, okay, let's so my example of that is Cthulhu or BRP,
Hmm.
because I use that for almost everything I run because it's easy. It makes sense to telling somebody they've got a 40% chance to do something is, it clicks. They're like, okay,
Hmm.
I can almost do that, and um, so what is it about one of your go-to systems that makes it kind of, oh, okay, I know these are the mechanics? Is it because you know it so well? Is it because it's super flexible? What is it?
Yeah, for the three current ones, uh, four maybe. So Fate, obviously, I know it well
I can vouch
because
for
I,
that.
I like the most recent edition, the Fate Core version, a lot. Because I write for it, because I work for the publisher, and so the rules are reinforced, right? Sure, I forget the rules for any game if I leave it on the shelf long enough, but this one I'm in contact often, and he does support that improv style and story first style. Like, it's more important that the story be interesting and exciting than to have perfect obedience to roles that simulate some probabilistic setting. And after that, Hero Quest I really love,
Huh.
for the same reason. You can stat anything, not the board game,
Right. The
the
system, yeah.
yeah.
That would be
And
funny if the board game was one of your favorite RPGs. I really love the little doors. That's
Yeah,
right.
there are sometimes board games where we kind of naturally make them into role playing games.
Right.
And PDQ, that is the engine behind um, Truth and Justice, the superhero version, the Sorcerer of Zoe, which is the fairy tale version. There's a series of different settings that are working. Swashbucklers of the Seven Skies, which is this airships and musketeers sort of setting. All of those are really good to go and stat. If the players want to meet someone, I don't have stats for the character. It's really easy to on the fly
Hmm.
create what I need, or stat even things that are inanimate. um, and then it's not really a system, but the Powered by the Apocalypse games, that family of games, also very handy for a GM, because it does it lighten your preparation time and gives you the tools once again to respond and have some time to think when they
Yeah,
throw a
that's
curveball
it's
at
really
you.
interesting how that is literally baked into the rules
Yes.
of the Powered by the Apocalypse. Is that the GM prep is part of the session in some
Hmm.
way, and you get stuff from the players, and that becomes part of the session, which I think is really neat. Yeah. What is it about the PDQ system that you really like? What's a mechanic from the PDQ system that you?
It was so simple. You had I, I forget. Usually, I think it's up to six qualities, um, and they're very similar to aspects. They're free form, like the abilities in Hero Quest, or some of the ones in Unknown Armies, not all. Uh, so you can have well, as an example, I ran it for a long time as the Truth and Justice, the superhero game, and every once in a while, people would bring a friend, and we had to make a superhero character for
A
them,
Death Star.
and roll with that. And it was 5-minute character creation, and we still got interesting. The granularity of the result was interesting. It wasn't like Some systems where if you're good at dexterity, you're good at shooting, and you're good at crafts, and you're good at driving, that means everything, right?
Right.
It was more satisfying than this sort of game. So one time I had, and often the people who those guests who sat at the table had never played a role playing game in all their lives, and they usually made the best players too because they didn't
Right.
have any preconceived notions. So we had one who decided that she wanted to have a body made of nanites. That was sure, we can do that.
So it sounds like the PDQ system is super flexible. What are its base mechanics? Is it like a dice
2d6.
pool or yeah, 2d6? All right, yeah.
2d6, and you add your quality and you roll versus a difficulty, and that ladder looks a lot like the Fate ladder.
Okay.
Every once in a while, I think I should make the effort to see if I can merge the two systems, but it's work, and I used to have a lot of time for all those fan conversions,
Right.
but now if I put in this time, but I might as well do it on something that will bring you revenue, right?
Right. So Fate is one of the ways that Sophie and I know each other. She runs Fate and plays a great deal of Fate. I sort of run Fate every once in a while, but so you had a we're now going to answer Sophie's mail on this episode. So you got a comment. Sophie has a blog that she posted about gaming on, and you talked about a game that I ran at Big Bad Con that you played in, and somebody commented on it. So what was that about?
Was it as old as 2013, 2014?
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago. And you had posted on the schedule this game with an absolutely wonderful premise. Do you still have any notes about that? Do you want to give the premise, or should I just?
I remember it very well, because here's my secret. My premises are so paper thin that I can remember all of them. It's a beauty.
This one was paper thin.
Paper thin. There we go. Oh man. So
yeah, that was awful.
I read somewhere that when the Pope dies, there is a whole ceremony to determine that the Pope is dead. And I was kind of fascinated by this. And so I started reading more about it. And there's a whole kind of ceremony that goes on the whole time until there is a new Pope. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this would be a really interesting game. And I thought Fate would lend itself really well to it. Because free form, and it wasn't going to be like you're the Pope, you're a 5th level cleric or something like that, and so all the players were cardinals and the Pope is dead, and that was the start of the game. And so the players would then try and go through, and there was all this negotiation to try and become the new Pope. And about, I don't know, halfway, maybe 2/3 through the game, I would pass a note to one of the players. And the note would say, did you kill the Pope? And the player could say yes or no. And interestingly, most of the time, the players said no. So I had to go to another player and pass a note. But the one time I ran it, somebody was like, yes, I totally did. And that may or may not come up in the course of the game. And how they did it, that doesn't matter at all. That sort of thing. But so I'm running this game at Big Bad, and Sophie sits down at my table. And so one of the things with Fate is that you can create aspects, you can invoke aspects. There's a whole school around that. And all of a sudden, in front of Sophie are like 47 index cards. and my knowledge of Fate is a mile wide and an inch deep. I use I don't know if I have one here. Let me see if I have the rules of Fate are actually on a. Do I have the bookmark? No, darn it. I have the Fate core book here, but the basic Fate rules are literally on a bookmark. Yeah, I don't have it here. Darn it. And you can then go much more in depth with the Fate core and kind of add and layer on that. But the basics of the game are the beautiful. I think the approach system is just fantastic. It's so easy to understand. It's organic, and just really great. So the basic idea is that the player tells you they want to do something, and you say, all right, how do you want to approach this? Are you going to be aggressive? Are you going to be sneaky? And that decides how they're going to roll and what they're going to roll. But it's the mechanics equaling the role playing. Because if you're approaching it sneakily, how are you being sneaky? It causes the GM mechanically to do things that good GMs should do anyway. Instead of if your rogue says, I'm gonna be stealthy, instead of just saying, all right, that's a DC 15 stealth check. How are you sneaking? What are you doing? And Fate mechanically causes you to do those things organically in the system, which I love. But I was not prepared for the deluge that a Fate master like Sophie would bring. And so by about the seventh index card that was down there, I was just like, sure, I guess. It sounds like something you could do. Yeah. It was really, but that game is a really interesting example of, creating a scenario out of just a random idea or something you read. And one of the things that I think is really neat about Fate is that everybody thinks Fate is like ridiculous superpower, Thomas Jefferson driving a mech to fight to fight the American Revolution. Over the top game. You can use Fate for really small things. You can use it for a very character-based studies. That in that Pope game, there's probably never going to be a fight, and if there is a fight, it's going to be a really sad fight.
Well, that's what it was. It was a social type of struggle, of conflict, and that's what I love about Fate. It's not, we've got 50 pages of mechanics for fighting hand to hand and shooting, and one page for everything else, right?
Yeah.
Any struggle, any conflict has the same structure, and you can be equally devastating. In this case, there was I put a bunch of advantages, and I'll get back to what that means in a minute, but there were things like, I overheard a conversation, and there was,
my
things
production assistant has brought the. So here are the rules to Fate right there. You can run the game off this bookmark, and I have.
And we do. Yes, me too. So
thank you, my love.
That was a very non-super, non-pulpy game, and it was extremely fun because we had these political animals, Machiavellian cardinals vying. Like, I hadn't killed the Pope, but I was ready to kill my fellow
that's right.
cardinals.
But it was a great example of how you can take any idea and turn it into a game. Like if you're running D&D, you could take that Pope idea and turn it into whatever your church of I don't know, Ilmater or whatever, and that sort of thing, and get the players involved in that regard. You can do that, and real life has the weirdest examples of anything. So take stuff from real life, and honestly, that's oftentimes I'm far more interested in the really small, petty, very terrestrial things, like family fighting or these tiny these little cardinals being petty and trying to be pope and that sort of thing.
Fiasco level
Yeah,
plots.
yeah,
By the way, Fiasco sets are an excellent starting point to a quick
100%.
game of just about anything, but certainly Fate.
Uh,
I
and
wanted to
and
get
honestly, the character creation is a strong word for Fiasco, but
yeah,
the
it's
Fiasco sort
set
of
up.
world building setup thing is also a really cool way to build a party. You know,
Hmm.
focusing
Yes.
on relationships. Focusing on the relationships between the players, and there's something. What is it between us that connects us? Can be a really interesting way to go about that. There's
Yeah, I
actually,
often
speaking of,
recommend it for starters, for new players.
yeah. Speaking of board games, there's actually a board game called Call to Adventure that
Hmm.
is I call it the backstory generator of the board game, because when you play through the game, you're going to build the backstory of this ridiculous super, D&D character that, fought his way out of hell to make it back, and it really sets it up so that you can get a great idea for your character. Because
Yeah, I like
oftentimes,
reusing.
yeah, oftentimes backstory can be a challenge. So we, you are a fate master. You know more about fate than I'll ever pretend like I know. And let's talk about the advantage system a little bit, because I think
Yes.
that it's key to the whole game, really. And so advantage is when you're invoking something about another person to give you an advantage in a role. How do you kind of go about making those choices interesting for your players?
Well, first I have to give a little for people who may not have played Fate, at least
Yeah,
not
please.
recently. Um,
I'll just hold the.
the bookmark. Um, for one thing, despite the fact that I like to play off the cuff, I'm also a math nerd to an extent. And I get really annoyed with games that have a bad handling of probability systems. There are systems where, as you go up in level, you have less chance of success at certain levels. An example was the first edition of Earth Dawn, and in fact, I think the second edition too, where it was really a fun system, and your average went up, but because the variance change so much because you change die types, you might end up having a less successful character once you raise the level. So all this to say, I do pay attention to the math of a game, even if I don't want to have a whole lot of math to track as a GM. And I have a friend who did some very interesting stochastic analysis of fate. But in short, the idea is that what the fate dice look like. I imagine your listeners
Let
probably
me
are
see if I
familiar,
have a fudge dice here.
but they have a plus, well, two plus sides, two minus sides, and two blanks, right? And each of those will give you 1 point up or down from the skill level you add to it. So on average, your expected result is the level of skill you have. It'll go up by uh, up to +4 and down to -4. But mostly it's going to play within +2 and -2, just again because of that variance, that probability curve, mostly. And that means that if you have opponents that have uneven skill, if we're trying, for example, if we're in a competition, we're running, we're both using athletics, and one of us has we have different skills. One of us is better at it. On average, that person will always win.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can have the occasional reversal, but the vast majority of the time, that it will make the difference. That's not so bad. That doesn't happen very often. But what does happen a lot is fighting, whether it's social combat like we discussed, or the more common and the more usual physical fighting. And it doesn't matter if you have, for example, One has an attack of 2 and a defense of 3, and the other has an attack of 3 and a defense of 2. On average, they're matched. Okay, so that means that if there is a net difference between two skills, it's in the long run, it's always the same person or the same character who's going to win, which is not very interesting nor resemble the kind of fiction we want to emulate, right? You have to do something to improve. Of course, you can get help on something. If it's a task that many people can do together, you'll get a +1 for having help, but +1 is generally not going to take you there. What the best thing you can do is create an advantage that typically will give you a +2 when you invoke it. If you do, on average, you'll get you can expect to create an advantage that will have 1 use, so you have that +2 you're saving for later. So what it can look like in a game I played, there was 2 of us, and we had both decided to make sneaky characters, and everybody else who had signed up for the game was one of those late at night at Big Bad Con
I
game, and they all
want to prove
bailed.
something.
So now it was just the 2 of us for one of those typical fantasy parties that are going to go on a rescue of prisoners in the mountain in the kingdom of the Lich King, right? And so it's like you have 2 thieves. How are you going to do that? So what we do is create advantages, like we'd scout out the route. We would acquire some supplies. We would bribe guards. All of those can be treated as create advantages. In terms of mechanics, they're all little bits of +2s. You leave your track of +2s that you can share with. If the person who created it can share it with others, but you don't have to. So you can always just use it on your next roll, but the best way to use it is often to create this ladder to make it to the stairway to heaven, to make it to the boss fight, and then see if you can use. Now some of them will become moot. They will not be applicable anymore because maybe you're in a different location or that person you bribed is not there, but you follow the fiction of those advantages. But now you have, even though you may be outmatched on a toe-to-toe conflict of some sort, now you've created a ladder to success. Yeah. And you can have some very spectacular boss fight where you explain that fiction, and that also changes what you will be able to do after.
Yeah, because your advantages are narrative, and so they're coming out of something like you bribed somebody to find out that the Lich King doesn't wear a left shoe, so if you stab the Lich King in the left foot, he's not going to have armor there, or some like, that's a very silly example, but
hey, Achilles heel.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, it's actually very literary. If you but that's so your advantages are taking a mechanic of the game and using it to overlay the narrative of the game.
Yes.
And so to use that advantage, you have to say how I'm going to go target the left foot because I know there's not a shoe there.
Exactly. So you create the fiction. We are all just talking, and you attach little mechanical bits that you can use at your when they're convenient to you. So now the fact that you did something has a mechanical value.
Mm-hmm.
And because the narration is is what we're trying to focus on, that's what we are trying to support. If you've narrated being sneaky, then now you've also closed some tactical options, right? You can't say now I'm going to break down the front door unless you got some other types of of advantages you've created, but the story doesn't lead there.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, the advantages as a GM, the advantages can kind of point you in the direction the players want to go.
Mhm.
Because if they're throwing down a bunch of advantages about setting the building on fire, set the building on fire, and give them what they want. And it can be a really great way for the GM to get instant feedback from the players.
So to close the loop as a GM, that gives me as a GM the tool to go where the players are leading, like that. Whereas I've played some games where it was much more, dependent on pre-written statistics. If you didn't know what the stats of the door were, it
Right.
was very inconvenient to go look it up. So some GMs have the ability to still run and take a roll with the punches that the players are throwing at the story, even in highly mechanical games. But that makes it in that case they're doing it because the GMs are good at it. They don't have the toolbox for it necessarily that you get with certain other games, and those toolboxes are the ones I enjoy.
Yeah. And one of my favorite things Fate does is the outcomes. So if you roll your dice, and there are four outcomes: you can fail, you can tie, you can succeed, or you can succeed with
Succeed with
style.
style.
Yeah. Um, but the interesting part of that is that failure, you can succeed. There's just a cost to to a major cost to your succeeding. So I stabbed the Witch King in the left shoe, but my dagger is stuck in his foot. And that is a great example of making failure interesting.
Yes. And it also asks some of the versions of that hard question: how much am I willing to sacrifice in order to succeed on this particular action? Sometimes it's more fun to roll with the failure, and that's something that's really hard to learn for old school gamers. Like when the way I came up in gaming, failure meant you probably were out at least of the round, or perhaps out of the combat, perhaps out of the scene, and that just wasn't exciting. And probably next turn, what you were going to do was try the same thing again. So
Right.
that wasn't exciting at all. And so we learned to do everything we could to avoid failure, and only use our good stats, and so forth. But nowadays, I think a lot of players who are familiar with indie games in general, that encourage the ups and downs, not just the ups, uh, will say, I'll take the failure. What's the worst that can happen? Maybe I could be captured.
I mean, in my Cthulhu games, my I have at least one player who looks forward to fumbles. Like the fumbles drive the story forward in a way that honestly critical successes don't.
Yeah.
Like if you do one thing as a GM, just make failure interesting. Don't
Yes.
make failure oh, you failed, sorry, game over.
Better
No,
luck
make
next
it,
time.
give them consequences, let them, I love, I have kept with me forever Fates succeed at a cost. Because I
Yes.
loved, I love that idea of, yeah, you succeed, but the cops saw you do it, or something like that. Just you know it makes things, it just ups everything, it ups the ante, it puts pressure on the players, it makes the scene automatically more interesting.
Yeah, I've ported it to other games like Savage World.
Mhm.
Sure, if you give me a Benny, here's what happens.
Yeah, and I mean it could work with Trail of Cthulhu in that regard, with
Yeah.
the spend and things like that. um so what is a hidden gem about Fate that like Fate GMs may not be using to the fullest?
They too can create advantages. But
Okay.
and there's also non Fate deck that you can use. I talked about the expense. When I played it, I used one of the scenarios that w- I adapted a scenario that was published by Green Ronin. And because, even though I'm not enjoying the system, I think they did a great job nonetheless. It's even though it's not for me as a GM, maybe it'd
Mhm.
be for me as a player. And certainly the scenarios and the background are interesting. So I used this one that has a derelict ship that's in the dark, and I ran this for Halloween. And I used, when it was on the roll 20, so I used the something I never do for Fate, all the the fog of war,
Right, right.
and so they were in fact with their little tokens exploring the ship. And but I have a group of thinkers, and they'll often start, planning over planning, and so I just stole the clock deck from Apocalypse World, powered by the Apocalypse, and Forge in the Dark games. And when they started just talking and talking, I put that little clock, and every time they talked and talked, I wouldn't say anything, just advance the clock, and they would go, "Hey, hey, hey! So, we better get going. The clock is
Right.
nearly there." They had
Yeah,
no idea what happened when the clock filled, but
yeah, that can
uh,
be a really fun thing. Adding a sense of time pressure in real life can make, in small doses, can be a really
yes,
neat thing to do to your players. It's not something you want to do in every session, but throwing it. I'm a big fan of timers. Like
yes,
I'll say, like, one of them says, like, I light the building on fire, and then I'll just roll a d6, and I'll just have, okay, I know that in 5 rounds everything's going to be on fire. They don't know that, and every round I just stick it down, and
yeah,
you know and when it gets to 2, I'm like, there's a lot of smoke starting, and they don't know when the thing's going to blow up, but they know it's going to blow up. That those are little things that can add, like, a little bit of terror to your game for your players.
but the best tech for the GM may be the fact that you don't have to know the stats of. You can just create them on the fly. So, okay, now I have to bring this alchemist to help the character. They went to a shop to find an alchemist, and there's some uncertainty as to, for some reason, maybe, it could be something where, yes, they just need an alchemist, and whatever they want to do will work. But if not, if it's a character that has to, we have to have some back and forth with, well, I can just start by thinking, well, okay, they probably have I'm going to give them a +3 in alchemy, or lore, and uh, they're not very good. They got a bad bedside manner, -1 at making the customer happy, something like that. And if there's anything else that comes into play, I can add stats as I go. I just have to write them down, because consistency is a basic courtesy to give to your players. But I don't need to know, everything else. I don't need to know if they fight well, for example, until they have to fight.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always the guy that tells you they fight well that doesn't fight well. That is the. Well, Sophie, you've been very generous with your time. We close every episode with the same question. So, Sophie, what is your favorite system to run?
Well, I think we went over it a lot, but
Oh,
yeah, it would probably be Fate.
yeah, yeah, I got that. What is a system you haven't run that you'd really like to run?
Uh, the Jiangxi in the banquet hall.
I have that
I
book.
I've played in the playtest, but I didn't. It wasn't the final version, and I haven't run it at all. And I would love a chance to. This is a beautiful box set, a beautiful book, wonderful people who wrote it. Just if people aren't familiar with it, the idea is that you play. Um, uh, immigrants from base at its base from China who work a restaurant somewhere, maybe in New York or in the Western world. At the beginning, towards the first quarter of the 20th century, and they deal with family issues, restaurant issues, and the occasional,
Ghost
hopping
attack.
vampire
Yeah.
or
Yeah, it is such a cool game. We had Banana on actually, and she talked about it.
oh,
So I still
wonderful.
haven't gotten a chance to run or play it. I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping there will be some Jiangxi at Big Bad Con because that would be on
There
my
will
list
be.
of games that trying a new system. That would be awesome. So the last question you is we ask it every time. It's the Space Jam question. Martians have invaded the Earth and they will destroy the planet where I keep all of my stuff unless you run a wildly entertaining 4-hour game for them. What are you running?
Oh, I run one of those set pieces, banquet event type of game, possibly with Fate, possibly with PDQ, something really simple. And I make sure there are as many major story arcs and problems as there are characters, and we use a premise like the annual fundraiser ball for the police in a city that is populated only by superheroes.
Ah, that's awesome. I love it. Well, Sophie, thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking Fate and other games. This has been awesome. If you get a chance, folks, you can find Fate and you can find Sophie's name all over these books. She has done a lot of work on Fate. She still does work with Evil Hat stuff. Pretty much anything Evil Hat puts out is gonna be good. You can pretty much guess.
We are overachievers. We
They don't
try
sponsor
hard.
the show, so I'm not going to say they're great, but that we can work on that. Sophie, thank you so much, and friends, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out our back issues. We mentioned Jiangxi Banana Chan, one of the authors of Jiangxi. We did an episode where we talked about a lot of her games. And we've talked Fate before with my buddy Trooper SJP in a back episode. So check out all of the great conversations we had. And Sophie, thanks for keeping the game moving.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope we game again soon.
I think so. Goodbye, internet friends.
Bye.